Hello there, this is Dahlia, and this is part 2 of my ending racism discussion on how music and sex within culture is what needs to be understood to better end the discriminative and oppressive nature that people have developed over time as a result of ignorance, willful ignorance, and just simply put, not understanding people from a realistic perspective, and just not understanding people from a more accepting and harmonious perspective. So let's begin. So this second part, I want to go a little bit more in depth with music, and last part I was discussing more the general overview of the issue with people not always knowing how to see how sexual insecurity is the driving force of racism, or refusing to accept it. And so this part, I'm going to go a little bit more into some understanding of exactly how what art really does to reinforce a culture, and why cultures rely on art like music to continue to reinforce it. Like I said, I already talked about how a lot of times the culprit of racism is just being sexually insecure. But I want to go a little bit more about how when we are supposed to look at art, we're supposed to look at how art, the older we get, the more we see how art ties to sex in pretty much everything, and that sex within culture is what allows people's sexual identities and sexual expression to exist. Like I was saying last time, certain music defines certain types of sexual preferences or behaviors with people, and it's just about being better educated to understand it, to not just assume that, like, say, aggressive sex is only with people who are darker skinned, because that drove a lot of racism for a long time. So I want to explain more how, like I said last time, industrial metal is very commonly tied to the culture of BDSM, and that is true. That's very true. But there are other lighter examples, like I think about how, like, country, is tied to sex, of course, too. But that kind of sex is usually slower, sweeter, less aggressive, just more like your traditional, slow, romantic kind of sex, like that, and that's really kind of how their culture is defined a lot by the music that is part of their culture. Even other types of metal, like country metal, is still very tied to that. So music's definitely art. Other types of art tied to sex a lot within a culture too. Like paintings, drawings, they tend to still tie to sex a lot. But it's not just, art isn't just always defining a culture's sex. I wrote it out here, but like, art also defines a culture's work ethic, and even a shared fear. So, again, like I said in the last part, a lot of racism developed this idea that work ethic could also be defined by the color of one's skin, which is just like, no, we're not doing that anymore. That's no good, That's just no good at all. No more of that, you know? Because I grew up from a family where I still grew up with learning how my older family could be very racist like that, where they would think that Hispanics, for example, were lazy. And, you know, it's just like, when I think about how you have people who get very racist like that, and they use willful ignorance where they're ignoring the facts that people are coming to this nation already expected to learn English, which isn't their primary language, and English is one of the hardest languages for people to learn. A lot of people who, you know, have learned English as a second language have said that it is a really difficult language to learn. So I don't know how you can call that lazy, you know, other than just your own insecurity. If it's not on sex, it's definitely on work ethic. And it's just like, well, hey, you know, some people just have harder work ethics, and this has nothing to do with skin tone. This has everything to do with, I still tie it back to culture, to say their culture, you know, that they work with, that they're tied to, that people are just tied to, like, even a shared fear. So like, you know, for example, not every culture is the dominant fear that drives a lot of people's decision making the same fear, right? Like, I think about how you have some cultures out there where, you know, history used to, I think, kind of like tie this together, but many Roman empires, a lot of people shared the fear, the common fear of especially I think for parents, a lot of parents felt afraid of being overthrown and replaced by their children a lot. Even like, you know, a dad feeling insecure about their son taking over as essentially the man, and even replacing the dad as a sex partner for their mom. Like, that kind of fear, you know, used to be, I think, a very common thing in earlier empires. But, you know, I mean, so I would tell people, if they watch this and they've had that kind of fear, it's like, you're not the only one. I don't have that fear, because again, I'm not a parent, and, you know, I don't know what that fear would be like, but I know that you wouldn't be the only one. And it definitely used to be a part of a culture, a shared fear. But, you know, that's an example I think of. But it's just important that for any group, any culture, essentially, to be valid on their sex, their work ethic, and their fear, their shared sex, their shared work ethic, their shared fear, is that culture can only be valid when they accept that not every culture shares those same things. That's when, you know your culture is valid, is you can accept, oh, well, you know, like industrial heavy metal culture, right? That sex is, you know, I've learned over time that, yeah, you know, I'm working on a song to describe it more, but like, that culture sexually is different from, you know, the emphasis someone kind of sex it appeals to is different from, like, pop, you know, pop music, sex appeal is different. You know, but I know mine can exist because I accept, you know, pop music, pop culture's right to their sex appeal, as well as their work ethic and their fear, their shared fear, which I think for pop culture, their shared fear is the fear of death itself, you know, dying. You know, like I don't really have that fear. I don't know what it's like to share that fear of dying. I know what it's like to fear dying and nobody knowing how you grew as a person. I know that fear, but I don't necessarily know just the fear of dying. You know, I've had a near-death experience in my life before, and you know, just able to say that I've been close to death, but yeah, my fear of dying is not just the straight up fear of dying, the way that I think a lot of pop culture really tries to emphasize as. So that's why I think a lot of the music I make isn't really just pop music. It still deviates from pop music. I don't know what their work ethic would be necessarily. I'm still learning a lot myself about these different cultures and their sex appeal, their work ethic, their shared fear, and all that. But like I am trying to emphasize is, in order for us to end racism on people's sex, work ethic, and fears, for you to really see people's sex, work ethic, and fears, you have to accept that their culture has a right to establish those as a shared as a similarity among people within that culture as well, as long as that culture accepts other cultures have the right to differentiate. You know, I think you know, I'm gonna end this kind of on this, but I think a lot of times racism was the result of people thinking that because they couldn't see people's fear about the same things, they assumed that person was a threat, not realizing people feel fear to the same intensity, just not about the same things. And when you're really in this tune, in this vibration like I am, you really know how to see what people's fears are, even when they're not yours. And that by doing that, by understanding these different cultures, and like I said, their sex, their work ethic, their fears, and how people bond on these viewpoints, these viewpoints, you know, physically, emotionally, mentally, people are more likely to better understand each other. But that's what matters. I could talk a lot more about different genres and what I've learned from those three things, from different genres of music. And like I said, we could go even to great discussions about art, poetry, movies, all of it. But I hope this opens the floodgates, if you will, for people to really start taking the moment to just think, what is my culture's, this is my homework for everyone who watches this. Start asking, what kind of culture do you say you're a part of, and ask yourself, you know, what's the sex appeal to it? What's the work ethic that everybody is supposed to have in it? And what's a common fear that is what everybody in that culture tends to fear? There you go. This has been part 2 of Dahlia's discussion on ending racism. I hope that you've learned a lot from it, and I'm looking forward to doing another discussion in the future. Take care, everybody.